Sure, we have the prime farm property for the farm. But, yeah.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome. I'm Margie Bushman, and I'm the program coordinator for the Center for Sustainability, working with our director, Adam Green. And I think before I start any more introductions, we're going to have Adam come and see if he wants to speak about any ongoing programs.
Hey, good to see you all out here on a Sunday night. Thanks for coming out. We had a great workshop earlier today, and this is part of our community education program, so we're putting a lot of effort into trying to create opportunities for the community to become educated in a variety of different aspects associated with sustainability. This is part of our overall program, Cities as a Solution, so the concept being, especially given the fact that the world population is now majority urban, how do we actually create solutions within urban settings? And I think you're going to get a lot out of this one in terms of how do we actually include the food system within our urban settings and what opportunities we might actually have coming from people who have already done it or working with it intimately. We have a lot of other programs that we've been doing, working with faculty on campus and infusing sustainability throughout the curriculum. We'll be working on a sustainability plan, at least that's what the president tells me we're going to be allowed to do, so I'm going to hold her to it, for the campus, finally. We're getting around to that. And we're hoping, we just turned in a grant, so keep an eye out for potentially a new eco-entrepreneurship program. The idea being, come and learn how to start a business, but actually learn how to start a green business. A one-year certificate program with modular type classes for people to come in and engage at various levels. So there's a lot of opportunities going on right now, a lot of opportunities for student engagement, and in many cases what we're going to be doing is kind of cleaning up our own house here, practicing what we preach, and continue to do what we do in the community. Our school gardens program is still going strong, so you can keep an eye out for that. We're going to have gardens in about 35 schools throughout the county by the end of this year. So that's very intimately related to what we're doing now. And a very active group that's educating kids about how to grow their own food and basically how to make healthier choices with their food so that it lasts with them for the rest of their lives. So that's just an overview of what we're doing. We have a website, sustainability.sbcc.edu. I think you've probably seen me go through here a few times. And we are basically a nonprofit on the campus. All of the funds that we use to create these types of programs come from donations. The Thompson Family Trust is largely responsible for the community education series that you've been benefiting from over the last 3 years. So we do hope that our community can also be our support, and I beg you, please, by all means, do whatever you can to help us continue to do these types of programs. And enjoy the panel and the discussion.
So as Adam said, this is our ongoing Cities as a Solution program, and we're very proud because with this we do try to highlight what, with good design, where can we, with cities, how can they be the solution and not the problem? And with tonight's keynote speaker, Richard Conlin, we explore the possibilities with innovative policy and design strategies, the opportunity to reinvite food and food growing back into our cities, where now more than 50% of our population now lives, and that's soon to be 70%. And so we have to learn these strategies. Every city has a future. That's a profound statement. And what we do now is what we will see in the future. And how we can envision a sustainable and resilient food system that goes beyond backyard and community gardens, but can actually feed cities' populations close to where they live. Tonight, Richard Conlin will share the strategies of Seattle's Local Food Action Initiative, passed in 2008, that envisions just that, an exciting new urban agricultural model that is good for the economy, the environment, and our health. But before I go on, I wanted to thank our sponsors for this evening's program. And each time we do one of these programs, we have many community sponsors that step forward. Nutiva Foods, the Fund for Santa Barbara, Island Seed and Feed, the Food Bank of Santa Barbara, who's done so many innovative programs recently, New Frontiers Natural Marketplace, Santa Barbara Permaculture Network, nonprofit, Santa Barbara Independent, the Slow Money Santa Barbara chapter, Sojourner Restaurant, all these wonderful food places, Permaculture Credit Union, and Soul Food Food Festival, who teaches us to celebrate around food. Also, I would like to take a moment to thank Carla Rosine, who's in the audience. Carla, if you wouldn't mind standing up, just briefly raise your hand. She came to us about 8 months ago with ideas about food hubs and young farmer training programs and many other ideas. And then she engaged us, and at a certain moment, we saw that we could fit in this particular program into our Cities as a Solution series. Also Wes Rowe, one of our biggest volunteers, but he found Richard Conlin. Made the suggestion with his endless research, and that's how we came to find the work of Richard Conlin. We, as the Center for Sustainability, our tagline is that we are a catalyst for a sustainable culture. And so that's what we hope to do tonight with this program, with the workshop that happened earlier today, is that we recognize all the work that's been done around this issue up to this point, and we want to show gratitude for this. And this program is just to sort of add energy to some that's already being done. And we really do express gratitude to all of you that have been in this for many years. And we want to also mention our Students for Sustainability Coalition club members. Most of them sitting in the back right now. They work, they're very committed, very smart, brilliant young people, and they, a couple of years ago, instigated a on-campus farmers market. And they also committed to the idea that the food be local and that it be organic, and that students on campus should have access to that food. And now I'll introduce our keynote speaker. Richard Conlin, who we are very honored to have and happy to have with us, is the founding publisher of Yes Magazine and co-founder of Sustainable Seattle and many other community organizations. He served on the Seattle City Council since 1997 and was its president for 2 terms. In 2008, Richard and the council launched the Seattle's Local Food Action Initiative. Following the talk, there will be a panel, and Eric Loella, who's with the City of Santa Barbara Environmental Services Department, will be the facilitator. Please welcome Richard Conlin.
All right, thank you very much. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and be part of this program. And it's wonderful to have a chance to see something of Santa Barbara. I'd only been here once before. It's a beautiful city. I really appreciate the things that I've been able to see and experience around the city in the short time I've been here. And I also want to say how much I appreciate the fact that this college is doing programs like this. College education is extraordinarily important, and the network of colleges and universities and community colleges that we have in our society is absolutely critical to making sustainability happen. Your education, your commitment, and your work is going to be the thing that really provides us with the people who are going to implement and activate and make it possible for us to have the kind of society that is potentially sustainable in the future. I serve on the board of trustees of Antioch University, Seattle, and we also have a sustainability program there. It's wonderful to see your sustainability program here, and when I did the workshop this afternoon, I was tremendously impressed by the interest, the commitment, and the true understanding that the students from the college here displayed in that workshop. It was great to have them there, and I really enjoyed the opportunity to be part of that. So tonight, I'm going to be talking about what Seattle's model is of working on local food. And we call our model the Seattle Local Food Action Initiative. And what I'm going to do is talk to you about how we got where we are, what we're trying to do, and what some of the accomplishments we have are, and then what are some of the challenges for the future. Because when we talk about local food, we're talking about something that has created a tremendous amount or stimulated a tremendous amount of energy among people and businesses and communities all over this country and probably all over the world. And yet we have a system that really is not designed to make local food accessible and to allow this concept to flourish for people around our society. Despite that, there's a huge percentage of people in our society who have grabbed onto this idea and are using it to help promote their health and the health of their local communities. But our challenges, and the challenge that we're moving towards in Seattle and that I can see that you're getting ready to move towards in Santa Barbara, taking that energy and that commitment and that passion that so many people are engaged in right now, and being able to take it not just from a few people to thousands of people, to a large percentage of the population, but really to scale. To being able to say the local food movement with healthy local food as part of an active living society is the way in which we do business in our country. That's what we should be aiming for. Not just 10% or 20% of the population or 30%, but 80%, 90%, 100%. That's the challenge that we're still trying to figure out in Seattle. We've made some progress, and let me talk to you about the progress that we've been able to do so far on that journey. So here's our regional food shed in Seattle. You can see Seattle in kind of the center of that. We have a population of about 620,000. King County, which is the boundary that we lay out there, has a population of about 2 million. Much of it is in the urban centers, most along the freeways that you see on the west side. And east of that is the urban growth boundary. And under Washington law, we have an urban growth boundary, and no urban development is supposed to take place beyond that boundary. Instead, it's supposed to be reserved for agricultural production, for forests, and for wilderness areas. The agricultural production districts are the areas of King County that are reserved for farmland. Not all of them are in production. That farmland is protected, but not all of it is in production. There's lots of other farmland around that rural area to the east of the cities that actually could potentially be in production. You can see we have a tremendous amount of farmers markets located in the urban areas. And the challenge that we have is how do we take that farmers market network and make sure that we have farmers for it. So from a government standpoint, the question that we asked was, how do you look at the local food system and apply a set of values and goals to that system? And when I started talking to my fellow council members about we should have a food policy, the reaction I got was, well, we don't really do food. You know, we do fire, we do police, we do human services, we do parks, but we don't do food. That's not part of our policy orientation as local government. And it took a while, it took a couple of years of work actually, to get local government officials in Seattle, our city council, very progressive city council, but to get them to get their arms around the idea that food was something that could be very strategic and could be a part of the way we think of ourselves as a city. Food is logically an organizing principle for many of the things that we want to do. We're interested in economic development. We want environmental sustainability, community and social justice. Those are the 4 principles on which our comprehensive plan is based. And the food system encompasses all 4 of those core concepts. And after a while, I got people to realize, you know, actually we are doing food. We're providing emergency food and food bank assistance for people. We have community gardens that we encourage people to cultivate. We have other kinds of things. We protect food safety through our health department. So there are lots of things that we are actually involved in the food system. But to finally get ourselves to the point of where we wanted to put in place a local food policy was a challenge. So part of that was coming up with values and common goals. and then figuring out, so what is it we can actually do as a local government? There are some things we can do, some things we can't do. We're constrained by legal and policy restrictions as to what some of the things are that we cannot approach. A lot of food safety, for example, is preempted by the federal government. But we do have a lot of other things that we figured out we could do. And then after figuring those out, then putting the commitment together, developing the partnerships that we needed to have with the private sector and with other governments in order to take that into action. One of the things we observed pretty quickly was that there was a real disconnect between what farmers thought they needed and what people in the urban area thought was necessary in the food system. It's possible to bring those things together, but at first there was not a good communication system. So we had this disconnect, and the farther away you got from the city, the more the disconnect took place, until our huge expanse of farmland in eastern Washington, which grows so much food that a lot of it is exported, the farmers there really thought they didn't have anything in common with the urban consumers in Seattle. And all they were interested in was seeing their food go through Seattle so that it could be sent somewhere else. Many of these farmers and small businesses really are not connected with the community efforts around food that were growing so fast. Most smaller farmers are being basically phased out of the system. They don't have access to small-scale warehousing, to small-scale local processing. At the same time, people are really hungry for local food. It was something that people really wanted. And grocery stores in our area were beginning to advertise and say, we're providing local food for you. And yet, it was clear that while there was this tremendous demand for it, there was no way that this demand could realistically be met unless we did a lot of reshaping of the system. Finally, the question of connection between public health and good food really began to emerge at the same time. And as we developed an active living program through our health department, the active nutrition program through the health department was also a very important part of our strategy. During this time, in 2008, the recession hit, and we found that the amount of demand at our food banks and the call for emergency food significantly increased. As we started examining the way in which our policies were developed, we discovered that there were a lot of regulations that weren't necessarily particularly rational and that were stopping us from meeting some of our goals. And above all, the reason we needed an initiative, there was no systematic policy approach, and the food system went beyond political boundaries. And we didn't know all the things that we needed to know. So what we did was we put together the Local Food Action Initiative, and these were the fundamental values that we decided we would embrace in it. Promoting local and regional food sustainability and security, advancing our comprehensive plan goals, making sure that it fit with the way in which Seattle was changing as a city, the people who were coming into the city, keeping our local money local, and making sure that we were able to generate export revenues from it as well, promoting public health, supporting environmental stewardship, and cutting carbon emissions. Seattle, just a little bit of a digression, Seattle ratified the Kyoto Protocol in the year 2000. We have a net zero emissions from city government at this point, and we've set a goal of net zero emissions from our entire city by the year 2050. Thank you. So here's our mission. A series of actions to promote local and regional food sustainability, improve our local food system, and advance those goals that we indicated. So we put together a series of activities that were part of that. Initially, those came through a city council resolution, and part of it was set our own house in order, look at what we were doing as a city with food in the city, get community partners and collaboration going, aligning our policies with the goals in the resolution, and then building relationships among the variety of participants. And that's in the private sector, in communities, in neighborhoods, and in other governments. Oops. We had no funding initially for the project. We did identify about $75,000 of money that we were able to allocate. But again, this happened right in the middle of as the recession was beginning, and we were pretty strapped for new money. We had one council staff person who spent a large amount of time on it. But other than that, we relied a lot on community collaborators and on tremendous involvement from students. We had lots of interns and lots of folks who were involved from various colleges. What we decided to do was to act in support of 3 specific goals: increasing opportunities for urban agriculture, increasing access for all of our residents to healthy and local foods, and providing permanent locations and more locations for farmers markets. For urban agriculture, one of the first things we did was go out and survey our public lands to see what might be available for community gardens. We had a community garden program. It's been going for a long time. We had more than 50 community gardens, but the demand was really huge. We had a waiting list of 1,500 people who wanted to get into community gardens. And it's very expensive to buy land, especially in a rapidly developing urban area. So we thought we'd go out and look at some of our public lands and see if we might have some property that could be dedicated to community gardens. We found a surprisingly large amount of property, stuff that either had been bought for some other purpose and was never developed, or in some cases we had parkland that conceivably could be used for community gardens. And then we found that we owned some property we didn't even know about, which was kind of interesting. That there were little parcels of property that had come to the city for various reasons throughout history, and the city had never done anything with, and some of them were really good community garden opportunities. We got a grant, one of the first food grants that came out of the Obama administration, which was focused on the needs of low-income residents, and that allowed us to do work on things like a healthy corner store program to try and get fruits and vegetables into corner stores, allowed us to really do some inventory of what were the opportunities and possibilities for low-income people to get involved. In 2008, we had a parks levy on the ballot, and one of the things we did in that parks levy was I got the council to include $2 million for community gardens. Parks levy passed, even though the recession had hit. Parks levy passed with 65% of the vote, and total funding of about $140 million for building and developing and buying new parks land. We planned to develop 4 community gardens. That was our commitment because we thought we might have to buy the property, which was probably all we could do if we had to buy the property. But because we focused on land we already owned, we've so far developed 17. And we expect to have significantly more before we've exhausted the $2 million. We've only spent $1 million of it so far. And then we convened a series of meetings to create some new partnerships and initiatives. One of them, these are some examples of them, a website that linked private landowners with interested gardeners. So say people who might be in their home who were getting older and no longer wanted to cultivate their garden that they had in their backyard, and renters who didn't have a garden available to them, and make that match. Seattle Central Community College developed a certificate program in urban agriculture. That lasted for about 3 years before they ran out of money. And then we were able to transition it to another college, which is continuing to keep the program going. We had an issue about regulatory impediments to gardening and planting strips, and told this story in the workshop this afternoon, but it's kind of a fun story. Basically, the Department of Transportation had told people they couldn't grow food in the planting strips, which is the area between the sidewalk and the curb in front of people's houses. And so we were kind of puzzled about this, and we looked at the city code, and we couldn't find anything in the city code that said people were prohibited from growing food there. So I went to the transportation department and asked them, why are you doing this? What's your interest here? What are you really trying to accomplish? And it turned out that food was not the issue. The issue was that they didn't want to have plants that were growing so high that drivers would not have visibility at intersections, and they didn't want to have permanent things put in the planting strips that might make access difficult for people with disabilities to get from the road to the sidewalk or other people. So those 2 things we figured we could take care of. So we wound up writing a regulation, and the regulation essentially said you can't grow anything over 3 feet tall within 30 feet of an intersection. Takes care of the visibility issue. And if you want to put a more permanent structure in, you have to get a permit from the Department of Transportation. It's a free permit, and they will consult with you to make sure that it's organized in such a way as to ensure that access takes place. So those are the kind of things that discourage people from growing food, that it's pretty easy to figure out, but somebody has to sit down and actually figure it out and say, what are we really aiming for here, and can we do this in a way that will actually allow people to grow more food? And we created learning gardens at our community centers, particularly targeted at young people and children, so that children would have the opportunity to come to community centers for the other activities they have and to participate in gardening at the same time. We also put in community kitchens at some of our community centers where people could come and cook together and learn how to cook together. A number of other things in that. For food access, we increased our city funding for food banks, and we worked very carefully with United Way to develop a strategic plan to reduce hunger in our county. And United Way had long been very active on hunger issues, but it was kind of piecemeal. They would provide funding to organizations, they would provide funding to food banks and so forth, but there was no kind of coordinated strategy. And what we got them to do was to work with us to create a coordinated strategy, which I call the 5-year plan to end hunger in King County. They're not quite willing to go to that slogan yet, but it's actually what it does. It really is a coordinated way in which we're going to provide the support and assistance so that we really believe that we can provide food to everybody in the county by the time this program is finished 3 years from now. We also tried to, one of the things that we needed was to have better information about who is hungry, what is the need for emergency food. So we directed our Human Services Department to get better data collection. And again, this is in the middle of the recession, we funded an outreach staff, I believe it's the only position we added to the city government in 2009, where to help people sign up for food stamps. To basically go out to the food banks, find out who's coming there, and let them know that they can sign up for food stamps and that would help them become more self-sufficient. We work with our school districts to get better quality food in the schools and at after-school programs. And we also worked with our health department to create a set of guidelines for healthy vending machines. And those guidelines we're in the process of putting into an ordinance for the city so that all of our vending machines in the city will have healthy choices as part of what they offer in the vending machines. Our Parks Department kind of jumped ahead and did it already in all of their vending machines. Would caution you about this. It turns out there's a lot of legal issues around vending machines, but that's a long story. But we can do it. You can do it. It just takes time. And that's the model vending machine policy which our Department of Public Health developed. Farmer markets were a really critical part of the way in which we brought fresh fruit in and bridged that urban-rural divide. And so we added a farmer's market at City Hall, on the plaza outside City Hall. The first year we did that, it did $1 million worth of business. Our City Hall is right in the middle of downtown, and we had 20,000 people within 2 blocks of City Hall, 20,000 employees. So it was a great place for a farmer's market. We also streamlined the permitting process for farmers markets. In Seattle, again, being a growing, developing city, many of our farmers markets are on vacant land that they have leased or underdeveloped land that they've leased from property owners. And we kept having farmers markets displaced because the property owner would come in and say, well, I'm ready to develop now, and so we're going to end the lease with a farmer's market. So what we did was we basically put a guarantee out that any farmer's market that was displaced, we would give them a street use permit for the street right adjacent to that property or in that vicinity and allow them to have the farmer's market in the street. And then we cut the permit fees for farmers markets by about 90% so that they would be able to have that in an affordable way. And we still continue to have issues with this, and we're collaborating to make sure that they do get permanent homes, but we know we can provide them with the streets. And we're developing a series of partnerships with King County to protect our rural farmland. Again, we know we want to grow as much food as possible in the city, but we know that we're not going to be self-sufficient as a city. We want people to get engaged in growing food. We want to encourage that as much as possible, but we've got to keep the farmers in business. And farmers are challenged by a whole lot of different things. And one of the things they're challenged with in our area is the temptation for development. Even beyond the urban growth boundary, you can still build a house on every 5 acres. So if you've got an 80-acre farm, you could sell it and 16 houses could be built in that area. And that's a very lucrative opportunity for a farmer. So what we do is we've created several different programs. There's a stewardship program where essentially a nonprofit organization buys the rights to that farm and holds it in trust. We are working with our central farmers market, which is actually city operated, the Pike Place Public Market, and we're working with them to develop a program where they actually buy some of these farms and keep them in business by leasing them so that they will have farmers that can provide food to the Pike Place Market. And we also have a transfer of development rights program Complicated program, but basically the basic philosophy is King County buys the development rights from the farmers, gives them an immediate cash infusion, creates a covenant that essentially means this will stay farmland forever. They then sell the development rights to the city, and then the city in turn sells them to developers. And developers, if they want to build out to the full envelope of height and density that they're allowed to, they're required to buy a certain number of development rights from the city. So it actually, we wind up having the people who are building large buildings in the urban area supporting, maintaining those farms. It's a neat program. And then we did create a regional food policy council through our Puget Sound Regional Council, which is our metropolitan planning organization. And that was an interesting challenge. There was an interim food policy council that had been operating in Seattle for several years, just a group of activists who had decided to form a food policy council. They had had a terrible time finding a permanent home, a location for a food policy council. And so they came to me and asked if we could find a way in which to give them a home in the city. We started working with it, and I sort of realized that a home in the city is not necessarily where they need to be. They need to be in a place where they can not only have city food policy, but county food policy, and really get out to the whole area that provides as much as possible of our food shed. So we wound up deciding that the best location was the 4-county regional planning body, and that's where we wound up establishing it. So it's now an official part of that planning. The body has a transportation planning, it does economic development planning, and it does urban density planning, and now it does food planning as well. So what are the lessons we've learned by going through this process? Well, first of all, one of the things that's really important is that all the stuff that we do, a lot of it just comes from ideas that's generated from the community. We listen a lot. We want to hear what people think is important and what's their possibilities in the community. And there are all these things that are happening in Seattle that sometimes we don't even know about them until they're actually starting to happen. Sometimes we can just provide them with a little bit of assistance, and they go ahead. Let me give you a couple examples of that. We have this program called the Urban Food Forest, and it's being put together at one of our parks, Beacon Hill Park. And Beacon Hill Park is a huge park. It's located in one of our major urban centers, and it was formerly, not only does this park have 1.5 golf courses and a lot of open land, but formerly it surrounded a reservoir. It was an open reservoir. Well, as part of this is one of those wonderful synergies. Under Homeland Security, we're required to cover all of our reservoirs. So what we did was we decided, okay, we have to cover this reservoir. We're going to take the next step. We'll cover the reservoir, and then we'll develop more parkland on top of it. So we dug it down and put the reservoir completely underground, and then we put soil on top of it, and now we have a huge addition to our park. So then some folks in the community came in. We had a big community process about planning what we're going to do on this. We had new athletic fields, we had new passive open space, picnic areas, all those kind of things. And we had a group of people come in and say, we want to create a farm, or an urban food forest is what they were actually looking for on this park. And the Parks Department was really not very happy about that. They thought this was a terrible maintenance problem. They were afraid of the liability issues that might be associated with it. It was just not what Parks Department does. They do athletic fields and they do picnic tables, but even though they have a few community gardens on their land, they were not ready at that point to commit to a food forest. They've really come along in the last couple of years. And one of the things that happened in the last couple of years was that we persuaded the Parks Department that an urban food forest would actually be kind of a neat thing to have. And eventually, they wound up saying, okay, we'll allow this to go ahead. I should say that we probably could have told them to go ahead, but as a city council, we try to work cooperatively with our departments. But there is the hammer if we need to. But eventually, we were able to persuade them that this was something okay. And now we have, I think it's about 7 acres of fruit trees that are being put into this land. and there's a covenant and an agreement. They designed it so that it wouldn't interfere with anything else. It's not over the reservoir because they were afraid of what roots might do to the reservoir. It's in a separate place in the park. The community has made commitments in terms of how it's going to be maintained. It's all designed so that the park's relationship is going to be really clean and easy for the Parks Department. And it's going to be going into production as soon as the plants are already in place, and it's going to be going into production. Really a cool project. But it came entirely from the community. We hadn't even thought of the idea, but they came to us and said, okay, let's try this. We have another group that's called Alley Cat Acres. And Alley Cat Acres is a group of young people, mostly people in their 20s, who just thought, you know, we don't have any access to gardens. We all live in apartments, and we don't have much access, and the waiting list for the city's garden program is really, really long. So even though with new gardens coming on, it's going to be a long time, and they were kind of impatient. So they decided to just go out and find vacant lots in the community and dig into who owned those lots, and then ask them if they could just put a garden in for 2 or 3 years maybe. Maybe it would last longer, but just take the land for a while that's vacant and undeveloped and develop a garden. So they found, I think they've so far found 4 locations where they've put a garden in place. And essentially they just mobilize a team of volunteers. They come out, dig out the whole piece of property, to get it ready for growing food. And within a couple of months, they've actually got crops planted and new food growing in that area. Really a cool project. Again, we had very little to do with that. It's all this community spirit that is creating it. And all we had to do was give them a little bit of encouragement. We provided them with, I think, a little bit of equipment to help them with some of the development. But most of it has been the community that's there. And it's our giving encouragement and enthusiasm and permission that really has helped to make this possible. Conceivably, we could have done the opposite. We could have been really negative and told them they couldn't do it. But we didn't want to do that. We really wanted to encourage this kind of volunteer activity. Finally, let me mention a third project, which is a really interesting one. I had a friend who was a chef, and she decided that what she wanted to do was to develop a project that would actually have a restaurant that would have food grown entirely on a piece of property that the restaurant would own. We have a lot of restaurants that are trying things like this. We have one that actually has a rooftop garden, and they're taking food directly down from the rooftop garden and cooking it. But in this case, she actually wanted to try and take some land and develop a garden. She called it Green Plate Special. And the idea was eventually to have a restaurant. Well, she hasn't been able to do that quite yet, but she does have the land, and she has developed a garden on it. But what she's done is it hasn't reached the level where she can go to the restaurant business, but she's partnered with a local elementary school. And what she's doing is bringing kids from the elementary school down to actually participate and be part of the gardening in this property. And so they're learning, they're growing, the food is being produced, and they're giving the food to back to the elementary school for their school lunches, and some of it is going to food banks as well as part of our program to get better food into food banks. So there's lots of activity there, all these new initiatives. People are really excited and really want to develop new things. The community garden program, while we're bringing them online so fast that we're actually beginning to reduce the waiting list, but there's still more people being added to the waiting list, and we think we need to continue to do those kinds of things. So by providing this container, the Local Food Action Initiative, we've really been able to help all these other projects take place. We've got a region that really has tremendous potential for being able to feed itself to a great extent. We've got a great land base, we've got the resources, we've got citizenry, there's lots of interest in organic and local food. Our colleges and universities have been very supportive. Many elected officials have now come on board. We've got the business community thoroughly engaged, lots of strong NGOs, and consumers are really interested in it. So we're taking it to the next level now on our quest towards being able to reach the level of 90 to 100% participation. We've established a food policy coordinator in our Office of Sustainability and Environment, and we established the Regional Food Policy Council that I mentioned earlier. Our long-range goal, we're thinking about other organizational homes. We want to keep the city's involvement engaged and the Regional Food Policy Council as kind of government entities, but we're also thinking about are there other organizational homes that might be able to carry some of these programs forward. Many of the people we're working with in the community are operating on shoestrings, and they really need to have coordination, and in some cases, government is not as nimble as would be optimum in providing that kind of coordination. So we're thinking about that even as we continue to increase government involvement. We're also looking at economic development, and this is kind of a strange story as well. So we have this great economic development strategy for the region, and our economic development strategy, like many regions, is based on what's the glamorous new industries that we can create in our area. So we've got a tremendous high-tech industry. Yes, we're going to get more high-tech. We're the leaders in social gaming. If you have a social game, any of you do Angry Birds, a lot of those things come from Seattle. We also have a great biotech industry that's developing in Seattle. Those are exciting because they're new things. So when we went to our economic development people and said, we think food is a great economic opportunity, and they were like, food? That's so boring. It's not exciting. But finally, we were able to convince them of a couple of things. One is we did a study of how many people were employed in the restaurant industry in Seattle, and it's extraordinary. And that's tied very directly to our tourism industry, which is one of our big growth sectors in the city. And so we knew right there's a hook that could get people involved. And then we started digging down into the food system and realizing how many people were involved in food processing and distribution and all of the other activities. And then we've pointed out to them how many more people like this could be involved if we actually were able to get more local food into the system. And so now we've actually finally gotten food identified as one of our growth sectors, and we're going to be making that part of the economic development strategy for the region. And we're working to do other things to improve coordination, to create a web-based directory. We actually created fostered the creation of a food-related chamber of commerce in the city, where businesses that are involved in food processing, and particularly some of the new local food, urban gardening, and urban growing enterprises have come together to create their own kind of chamber of commerce for food businesses. The Regional Food Policy Council, I'll take a couple minutes just to talk about that, since that is something I know you all are thinking about. It was organized 2 years ago. One of the critical points about this is that we decided, rather than this being a volunteer council where we just take anybody who wanted to be on the council would be part of the council, we organized it explicitly as a governmental advisory body. And the representatives on the council represent different sectors of the whole food movement. So that means that we have business representatives, we have representatives from the grocery stores, we have representatives from the distributors, we have representatives from farm organizations, and we also have representatives from the food banks, we have representatives from social change organizations organized around food, we have representatives from the tribes, we have all different kinds of entities that are represented. What that does is it gives us a great deal of both continuity, because if somebody stops coming, which is one of the things that happens with volunteer groups, we know that there's a slot there that we can find another person to fill that slot because it's a designated representative. And we know there are lots of people who are involved in that, and we just have to go out and recruit. So we don't lose participation as people drop out. The other thing is that it provides an element of legitimacy to everybody who's involved. We know that any policies that come out of that are going to have a very high degree of consensus. And if they have that high degree of consensus, it means that everybody in all of the sectors that are involved and are going to be affected by this policy are going to agree that this is a good policy and a policy that they're willing to move forward with. What that means is that as we move from the policy development phase into implementation, we're going to have a great deal of buy-in from people, in some cases people such as the grocery stores, who might have resisted a lot of the policies that we started out thinking about a couple years ago, but now we're beginning to understand, okay, if we make this kind of change and that kind of change, it actually works for us. And so they're okay with going ahead with them. Funding continues to be a challenge. We funded it through some money that I've gotten from the City Council for the first 2 years. And because of the recession, most local governments have been really reluctant to commit to new funding while they're cutting other things that are very high priorities. So we haven't tried to establish a permanent funding system, but eventually we're going to have to do that. One of our key products is a set of comprehensive plan policy recommendations. The goal is to get all 65 local governments in the area to actually adopt comprehensive plan policies that will encourage local food production, consumption, distribution. And we've got these policies in final form now as recommendations, and now we're going out to the various cities to get them adopted. Seattle has already committed, but we've got lots of other cities that we need to work on in order to make that happen. And we're developing a food policy web, which essentially is a web-based tool where you will be able to go in, and any food policy you're interested in, you can enter as a question, just kind of a Google type of question, and then the food policy web function will essentially tell you, so who's involved in this area on that question, and what are the leverage points at which you might need to work with in order to get that particular policy changed or adopted. So we have formed it. We've got a really good concept, and we're still getting ready to deliver the policy output, which is what our long-range goal is. So those are the things that we're aiming for. There's some problems. It's obviously difficult to move a whole region in this area. And here's some of the issues that we've developed or we've figured out, our constraints and challenges. It's hard to get people to think of a systems perspective. Everybody wants to do one thing. They want to grow, they want to process, they want to consume, whatever it is. But we need to get people thinking about the whole system. And we still have a lot of people who don't identify it as an essential service. From a governmental perspective, that's really a challenge. Not enough structure, not enough staffing. Elected officials need to continue to be educated, and then new ones get elected, and you have to educate them and get them involved. Policy making is very slow, and institutionalizing change is always a challenge. So those are some of the things we're still working on. In the future, I think I already did this one. No, I guess maybe not. Okay, anyway, I mentioned the focus on economic development, but we want to strengthen urban agriculture, protect farmland through these food shed initiatives, expand our campaign for healthy food for all, and create indicators of success, and continue to develop urban farms and gardens on city land. We've actually opened 3 farms now on city land that we've leased to people that are not just community gardens, but are actually real significant farms. It's all being done by nonprofit organizations, but it's something that really is, again, a sort of next level of taking it to scale. And I should mention that as we move through that, there's been a lot of other policy things that we've had to do in order to allow people to grow food. I mentioned the one about planting strips. We also had land use code changes that defined what an urban garden was. It turned out that we didn't have a community garden definition in our land use code. And we also prohibited people from growing and selling food out of their own properties. That was against the law. So we changed that. And now you can have urban agriculture on your private property up to 4,000 square feet outright, permitted outright. Above that, you have to get a conditional use permit, but you can sell the food and you can sell products that you've made from the food immediately out of your home. And we also legalized urban goats, and you can have up to 8 chickens. So this is what we're aiming for. It's sustainability, it's our future, and our goal is to empower, embrace, and harvest the collective wisdom of the community. Thank you very much.
What do we think of that? Wasn't that impressive? One more hand. Now, I know a lot of faces in this audience. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eric Llewellyn. I work at the City of Santa Barbara in the Finance Department, and I'm part of the team that manages a lot of our environmental programs. you know that as recycling and composting, the commercial programs. But listening to Mr. Conlin speak, I think I've never heard a speaker come to Santa Barbara that probably has as strategic of a vision that they've clearly implemented, is seeing results from, that's as close to where we are. I really, really found a nexus point from a lot of things he was saying. A couple that I heard were economic development. You guys know we're in the top 1% of all ag counties in the country? Did you know that? We grow $1.2 billion a year of food in Santa Barbara County right now. Top 1%. We don't think about that on the South Coast sometimes because we're really packed in here in a way. That said, very similar to Seattle. Urban limit line, lots of ag surrounding us, great opportunity. Your young urban foodies, I think if you live downtown Santa Barbara, we've got tons of restaurants that are popping up constantly. We're talking about food. We're appreciating food. Really great similarity. I think that was incredible. And really, I think you summed it up wonderfully. Our region has all the pieces, just like Seattle and that area. We do have all the pieces, don't we? We really do, and that's so exciting, isn't it? And so we want to bring up some of the people that in our community are absolutely committed to creating this change. If you can't see the name panels, I mean, every person that's up here has made a major commitment to making Santa Barbara and the South Coast a better place, all the way up to Quail Springs, Cuyama. These are people that are building, that are doing, that are creating. So I want to invite up our panelists right now. We're going to get a question going, and then we're going to take your questions. So we really want these folks to be able to share their insight. They know far more than I do, and they know a lot more than most people. And they want to share with you guys so we can get this information in the community, and then we can make change about it. So come on up, guys. Just a quick, do we have a wireless mic when we do questions? Yeah. Perfect. Can I get that? So I'm going to be really brief in introducing these folks because I think a lot of them are well known. But we've got everyone from Dawson Williams who is in our state assembly, which is absolutely fantastic. We've got Allison Hensley. Who here's been to Soul Food? That's right. Fantastic. Wonderful work. Jasper Eiler, who's doing Harvest Santa Barbara. Am I okay?
Yeah.
Should I stop moving?
No.
All right.
Closer the better.
Meg West with the Goleta Planning Board. Thank you so much. Warren Brush, fantastic work at the Quail Springs. Krista Harris, Edible Santa Barbara Magazine. Eric Cardenas, Loetry, doing amazing stuff. And Lorian David, Edible Landscapes. Fantastic. With that, I want to get right to the question for you guys. So we've got this challenge of creating a local food policy council. We've got policy initiatives that people want to get implemented. From you guys' perspective, given what we heard about what's going on in Seattle from Mr. Conlin, what do you think are some of the challenges and some of the success points that we can start talking about and touch on and bring this forward? I want to start with Das. Give us some perspective, Das.
Well, I think that a council is definitely accomplishable. So I guess what I would want to talk about more is what would be the challenges and what would be some of the reachable goals for such a council to implement. I'll start with some of the things that we're already doing as a community. I heard a lot of people take in breath when they talked about undergrounding a reservoir. Well, we already did it. Sheffield Reservoir is undergrounded and it's a great park, so if you haven't gone out there, you should go walk it. We worked on that when I was on the city council. We also started the first commercial composting program, so if you know a restaurant that is not taking part in that program, that's a problem and you need to call Eric. Because he still works at the city. And we just, until this year, it was illegal to as a cottage food industry to produce mixed nuts, tortillas, bread, all sorts of basic things that you think that probably there's not a whole lot of ways you could kill people making it. So we just passed a law this year, the governor signed to legalize cottage food industries in the state of California. But let me tell you kind of what I would say is the biggest impediments we would need to get past. One is fiscal instability. You can't lower permit fees. You can't change parkland. You can't maintain programs without money. California has gone from, for instance, a budget of $134 billion 4 or 5 years ago to $91 billion. So that's a contraction of more than a third. Of course, if you go to a university, you feel that. If you have a relative that's disabled or elderly, you feel that. Fiscal stability helps breed that. So I'll put in a plug for Prop 30 if you like fiscal stability and you don't want to see this college cut anymore. The other impediment I would say is our lack of acceptance of density. If we implemented significant urban agriculture in this community, but at the existing development patterns, we would just make our transportation sustainability even worse because we still have a lot of jobs here. So if we really believe in urban agriculture, then we have to believe that suburban living at 4 units per acre is absolutely diametrically opposed to sustainability in every sense of the word, whether you're talking about water, electricity, or gas. I think that's a real important one. Lack of land, that's a hard one. All of these are accomplishable, by the way. I just want to say those are the things we have to hit to get past it if we want to make it significant. And the last is our general NIMBY tendencies. Urban agriculture involves smells, visitors, and noise. And I can't tell you historically how many battles we've found. I grew up in Goleta, right in the center of the suburban urban interface, and there's been so many battles over the years, and a lot of people prize urban agriculture, but some of the neighbors, who of course their houses were once urban agriculture, don't. And so we have to accept that living in a community that has urban agriculture is not the same. I would say with that things like declaring a holy war on grass in this community is I don't mean I mean lawns. That's something, as someone who grew up here during a drought that really threatened this community, I find it ridiculous that we haven't gotten rid of most of our lawns in this community. And both in private and public land, we could do a lot more to increase sustainability. Because the water usage of urban agriculture is less than lawns, which shows you how much lawns use. Expanding our composting program, which has been a very big political fight, let me tell you, and making streets available for more markets, I think are really, really reachable goals for us as a community. Oh, and I love your little Mo strips idea. I love that one.
Great.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Allison, you ready?
I guess so.
I know you got a lot of thoughts in your head there. I can tell. You're excited.
I'm like all these notes. I have a lot of questions for you. Everything I want to do is illegal. That's a Joel Salatin quote, and it's not necessarily true in Santa Barbara, but I do feel like a lot of the policies don't actually facilitate growing food everywhere. Small producers being able to produce food in a way that makes sense for their pocketbook and for the people who want to buy their products. Our local food system is missing a few key elements. It's Eat Local Challenge Month, the month of October. So that essentially means you're not eating much meat or dairy or cheeses or tortillas or there's a few other things, breads. There's a few of them, there's a few things, but really the status quo isn't pushing for small producers. So I'd really like to see some food policies go through that do help small producers get their feet off of the ground. You had mentioned, with the cottage food bill, which is amazing, but Heather Hartley and I, who's my partner with Soul Food, have been in many, many conversations with the health department and trying to have Soul Food Festival be an example of the local food system. So we had this whole idea for the artisan market and had about 12 artisans on board lined up to bring their products, and everything from jam to granola to, all the full spectrum of what we have here. And at the end of the day, we had to pull the whole thing because no one knew about a wholesale retail permit that was needed. So no one had this permit that costs $250 and takes about 6 months to process. But it is what it is. But the thing was, there wasn't the communication. The health department, which I was working with Dana Solom, who's absolutely amazing. She grows her own food, has her own chickens, and most of the things that we bring to her, she's like, I don't know, I'm gonna go have to check in with them. She has to keep going back to the books and reinterpreting the code. So there's something in the health permitting code that we could really work on that would make it a lot easier for us to do what makes sense, really, because like you said, tortillas, granola, jams, there's not a really high rate. They're not high-risk foods. And then the cottage food bill is only really